welcome back to Performance Process. This is the podcast where we break down the processes behind the world's best performances so you can apply them to your own riding. Today, we delve into aerodynamics with none other than Xavier Disley of Aerocoach. Xavier brings a wealth of experience having worked with athletes from local time trials all the way up to Grand Tour winners. His expertise spans across aero testing, equipment development, and he even advises manufacturers on how to create components that reduce drag and thus enhance performance. In this episode, we cover everything from critical importance of aerodynamics in cycling to actionable and tips to improve your own aero. One of the highlights is Xavier's perspective on what truly matters for every rider, whether you're already optimised to the nth degree or if you're only just learning that getting aero isn't heading to the shop for a Nestle chocolate bar. We also discuss practical and simple tips such as the best riding positions, how seemingly small details like your clothing fit and even saddle angle can make a huge difference. He shares advice on choosing the right gear and why your choice of tyres could be like adding a constant 1% climb to your entire ride. He also shares the simplest of tweaks to things we're already doing that can greatly reduce our aero drag, or in other words, free speed. This episode is packed with insights that you won't want to miss, but better yet, it's only part one. Part two with Xavier Disley is coming soon, and in that we're going to delve into the world of aero testing. But before we do so, let's talk everything aerodynamics with Xavier Disley of Aerocoach. Xavier, welcome to the show. You're Xavier Disley, but you're also the Aerocoach, which I think is just a great company name, but also a great title to have. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem at all. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I mean we're here to discuss aerodynamics. We also plan to record a show on aero testing and all the different methods that are available. We're going to see how the first half of the show goes today. We may well get into that. We might not get time, but either way, I think we're about to get into is going to be fascinating for myself and for the listener at home. Before we do that, though, can you maybe, for those who don't know who you are and who Aerocoach is, can you maybe give us a bit of your own background and a bit of Aerocoach's?
Sure. So I mean, I've been riding bikes for years and years, nearly 20 years now, and started riding bikes at university, as I imagine a lot of people might have done, and got heavily into time trials and track racing pretty early on. I have a background in academic science, so sports performance, and also exercise physiology and kinematics in cycling. So I did that at the University of Portsmouth, University of Birmingham, and then I took over Aerocoach in 2015. So I was doing work for Aerocoach doing aero testing and things since 2012. So over a decade worth of doing that. Since I took over in 2015, we've been manufacturing components as well, and that's obviously a large part of the business where we make things like wheels and handlebars and chain rings and all sorts of stuff. And although famously don't really talk about who uses our stuff, if you turn the TV on, you'll see people winning very big races with Aerocoach components, often with the logos taken off, which is fine. That's the point. Got to keep the sponsors happy. And we also do a lot of work with manufacturers and things. So behind the scenes, we'll maybe design components or refine things or help people with CFD, computational fluid dynamics, if they need that kind of help. So we have a wide scope. Aerocoach has a wide scope of applications, really. So whether it's working with athletes who are trying to race their local time trial and we're trying to help them get better, or if it's literally all the way up to Grand Tour winners, trying to help them win the biggest races in the world, we work with everyone in between.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you trawl through the Aerocoach website and it's obvious the breadth with which you work. There's aero testing services, there's coaching services. There are those time trial wheels that you might not talk about and teams might not keep the stickers on, but I quite often include in my time trial galleries of different teams that have spotted using your Titan wheels and your disc wheels as well. And then you do a lot of consultancy work with manufacturers and developing new aero equipment. And that could be frames, it's most often frames, if I understand correctly, is it?
Yeah, so we've done frames. We've helped out with tube shapes of frames, complete frames, little bits of frames, and then various other components like like handlebars and stuff like that. Because we've got the ability to do, in-house CFD, we can, tune the requirements of a particular project, however the customer needs it. So, a manufacturer will get in touch and say, look, we need to look at this particular aspect of a thing, and whether it's us helping redesign it or whether it's us just giving them the information that they need for them to then redesign the component that they've got. We can kind of do both. I'm happy to do so.
Can you give us any frame names that you've worked on, or is that all top secret?
Oh, no. So the obvious public one is the Dolan DF5, which is a track bike that Dolan, which is a British company, released in an update to their previous kind of long-standing, really popular carbon frame called the DF4. And Dolan came to us and asked us for help to develop DF5. So that was a big project for the Paris Olympics. It was, we had to get everything done and finished and made and everything so that it was able to be used in the Olympics this year, which was a really good project to be involved with. They really enjoyed the process. The company were great to work with as well, and so we did the aero design on that and ended up with a really great bike that I'm really happy with. And it was a good fun project, that one.
I mean, unless you're Adrian Newey, you can't see Aero, or perhaps you can, but that bike certainly looks phenomenal. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, well, I race one now, so I've got to put my money where my mouth is. It's fun to ride with too.
Cool. We're gonna kick off the show today with a bit of a discussion on aerodynamics from the Aerocoach yourself for listeners at home, and sort of I think if anybody listening to this podcast, they're probably already pretty aware of the benefits of Aero. I mean, do you want to give us a 30-second snapshot in your opinion why it is so important to focus on aerodynamics before we get started?
Yeah, and I know it turns some people off, maybe not the listeners to your podcast, but some people really kind of push back on Aero because it's this kind of ephemeral thing, isn't it? You can't see it, as you just explained. It's very difficult to get a grasp on, and you have to. And there's a lot of trust involved in understanding what aerodynamics is and how it applies to you. You'll get told by a manufacturer that this thing will make you more aero, and really, you often don't know if it is or not, or maybe that will be true in certain scenarios, but not in others. So aerodynamics, I think, it applies to. I mean, it does apply to all cyclists, regardless of how quick you're going, but obviously it makes more of a difference the faster you go. It's not just something for racing cyclists who are smashing down the road at 50 kilometers an hour on a Tour de France day. It is applicable for someone who's traveling at 25 to 30 kilometers an hour on a longer endurance ride or a training ride or something like that. So if you're interested in going faster, and that's not necessarily the goal for every single ride that someone does, if you're commuting to work, then maybe you want to go a bit quicker, or maybe you want to extend it to get a bit more training time. But if you are interested in going faster on the bike, then looking at aerodynamics and understanding your own personal aerodynamics and how that applies to your riding is important.
Yeah, it's weirdly, regardless of your speed, like the faster you go, the more aerodynamics are important because the harder it becomes to go that tiny bit faster. But if you're like doing an event where you're maybe not hitting the highest speeds, you're doing a Grand Fondo or whatever event it might be, in the opposite direction, the longer you're out there, the longer you can benefit from the aero gains. So it kind of, I always find that funny. You
save more time because you're out for longer if you're traveling a bit slower, which seems a bit counterintuitive until you think about it for a bit. But yeah, if you're taking 4 hours to do a ride, then you'll save more time than someone who's taking 3 hours to complete that ride if you improve your aerodynamics by the same percentage.
I want to get into like from your experience, if there's any sort of and it's so individual. I think that's part of the conundrum with aerodynamics at the moment, as we can sort of rely more and more on manufacturers are delivering truly more aerodynamic equipment. Each iteration is faster, but what we're understanding more and more on the opposite side of the scale is that it's also individual. There's very little you can take as granted will be faster for everyone. But I'm curious, have you got any like do's and don'ts for riders at home in terms of aerodynamics? Where should you start?
Yes, I think that the understanding that you as the rider are the largest source of drag on the bike is crucial. So if you're looking to improve your aerodynamics, then you've got to focus on you as the rider. Yes, you get a fancy bike or you get nice wheels or whatever, then that'll help too. But you're generally speaking 80% 75 to 80%, depending on what kind of bike you're riding, of the overall drag of the system. And the simple thing to look at is clothing. And that's something that we see, you see it all the time. You see it on group rides, you see it at the super high level. Clothing is important. And by clothing, I mean not just the latest, fanciest textile or fabric, just whether your clothing fits you properly or not. And so step one is make sure you've got clothing that fits you, because it covers, that 80% of the total drag system. And if you have a flappy jacket on, it will be slowing you down an awful lot. I do remember years ago, I used to coach the University of Birmingham Cycling Club. And when we went to the track, it was an outdoor velodrome, and we had a chap who was doing his flying 200s with a big flappy jacket on. And I said to him, I was like, you've really got to take that off. That's going to make you no, it won't make any difference at all. Took his flappy jacket off and took a second off his flying 200 time or whatever it was, which is crazy. So sometimes you get the ability to really show someone the impact that clothing can have. So tight fitting clothing is really important. And I think that's the first thing, that once you get that right, and if you have been riding around in a winter jacket for ages or something, and then you put on your summer clothing and you go an awful lot faster, that's hopefully like a good comparison people can get. And following on from that, again, because the rider is so important, your position on the bike is crucial. Now, that's not going to be something that's easy to fix for everyone. And when I say fix, I mean improve, because changing tighter fitting clothing or non-flappy clothing, that's fine. But having a more aggressive position to get you, let's say you're on a road bike and you want to lower your torso angle, because that's often more aerodynamic, getting a more aggressive position might not be achievable for everybody. But at least understanding that in certain scenarios, like if you're going into a really strong headwind, or if you're traveling very, very fast, that's when aerodynamics makes more of a difference. Lowering a torso angle, getting a bit lower on the bike, using the drops if you can, or holding that aero hoods position that you see people use in breakaways, is dead important. And trying not to sort of sit up into the wind to get a bit more effort out. Let's say you're in a race or something like that. Oftentimes, yes, your watts might go up, but your speed may go down. So it's understanding that relationship between, what is your goal? Let's say you're in a race, your goal is to go fast. It's not to see a big number on your head, on your Garmin or your Wahoo or whatever, in terms of your power output. It's to actually go faster. And so your aerodynamics is crucial as part of that little balancing act between how much effort you're putting out and how fast you're actually going.
It's interesting the order you give those in that clothing and kit was first and then position was second. I had expected you go the other way, but I mean you've explained why there.
Yeah, it's just because it's not you. Some people just can't. If you have impairments or different difficulties and flexibility in things, the last thing you want to be told is, oh, just sit in the drops for 4 hours. The easy thing to do and the simplest and first thing is just to get slightly better clothing, and then you'll just go quicker. And that's like a given, and you might not even have to spend any money. You just have to go to your wardrobe and choose the right clothing to wear for that day. But obviously position is going to make more of an impact if you can hold it, and that's going to take a little bit of time maybe for you to train and do some flexibility work and that kind of stuff.
I think it's one of those things we intuitively do. You mentioned riding into a headwind or bridging to a breakaway or something. We just intuitively get down. My daughter is 5 and she knows to get when she's going, she knows to get herself her frontal area reduced as much as possible. She doesn't know anything about aerodynamics, but she gets that. I think we've all learned in recent times, like going into the drops is probably less aerodynamic than getting into the hoods and getting that aero tuck position, getting your arms bent at 90 degrees. Dare I say it, getting into the puppy paws position. And I know, and listeners can go onto the Aerocoach website. You've got a whole learn section within the site that delves into a whole load of different things that Aerocoach has tested, but you have tested adopting different aero positions on a road bike. Can you give listeners a bit of an idea on what you found there?
So yeah, we've got a bit on the website. So we went to an outdoor velodrome to do some testing with Richard, who's our head of customer service and also multiple former national time trial champion. And we did a load of different things. Now this is just before the UCI banned, or maybe just after, I think the UCI banned the puppy paws position. And also we did a lever hooks position. So you sometimes see people wrapping their hands all the way around the lever, kind of from the inside. And the reason why you do that is to increase reach on the bike, because increasing reach lowers your torso angle. Now, UCI then introduced some info where they, some regulation updates where they allowed for a little bit more reach kind of naturally on the bike, which kind of reduce the need for people to do this necessarily. But we basically found that, as you say, the hood's position. So hood's position is where you hold your hoods, your shifters, and you've got straight arms. That's terrible.
You're more upright.
Exactly, because your torso angle's high. When you go into the drops, it's obviously faster. And it was about, in our little test with Richard, it was about 14 watts faster at 45k. But then the Aero hood's position is the winner, really. It's more sustainable than some of the more extreme puppy paws things. And that's where you hold the levers, you bend your elbows to get your forearms parallel to the ground, which reduces the frontal area, which if you look at a rider from the front, it's their silhouette. They're kind of like, the outline of the rider reduces the frontal area because your arm's parallel, and that saved another kind of 20 watts or so on top of the drops position, because your torso angle is very similar, but your forearms are now kind of parallel to the ground now, not out the airflow, but the airflow is a lot nicer. We then tried a few different positions where we were doing that lever hook thing where I said you wrap your arms around. That was pretty similar to Aero hoods, pulling the levers in, which I think is something that you're obviously not allowed to do in UCI regulations now. They've brought in...
Well, there's a limit, yeah.
Exactly. We did find that when people were doing that, there was a tendency for people to pull the levers in and their elbows stick out, kind of like, like chicken wings sort of thing. And that kind of negated most of the benefits of having slightly narrower levers. So we never really recommended it. And when we made some road handlebars for all these new regulations, then we stopped you from being able to pull your levers in too much by putting a little stop on where the cables can go in, because it's just not very safe either. So I'm happy the UCI managed to ban that. And then we did the little puppy paws thing, which was the quickest position we tested, but it was only like 5 watts or so better than the nice Aero hoods position, and you have zero control, and it's just it's a terrible idea. So I think that from a safety point of view, the UCI have done the right thing, and you're really on the bike. You've got 3 positions that people can, maybe 4 positions, that people can hold. You've got holding the tops, which you do when you're climbing, holding the hoods, which is a little bit more reach as you go forwards towards the shifters, holding the drops, and then the Aero hoods position, which is the more Aero of the 4. So understanding when to use those, as you were saying before, like people intuitively know what works and what doesn't. And I think that the phrase "getting out of the wind" is something that people will throw around a lot when they're riding. We've got to get out of the wind. So whether that means getting behind someone or getting down low on the bike. Getting out of the wind means you're not getting out of the wind, are you? You're not, like, the wind's still there, but it means getting more aerodynamic. So the next time someone says that on your ride, and you know that they're a rider who doesn't subscribe to aerodynamics as a thing, it's just like, you've just told me to get more aerodynamic. so I think that it's always been a part of cycling. It's just people haven't necessarily attributed it to wind tunnels and CDAs and drag graphs and stuff like that. But it's always been there.
You mentioned Richard there, who you did the testing with, and readers of Escape Collective might know Richard's. I'm assuming it's Richard Bussell that you're talking about, who we featured in an article last year following the National 10-mile time trial, and some of the aero hacks that were going on there, which were, let's just say, complicated. Because what I want to segue to is just that what I'm hearing you say is we don't need to overcomplicate it too much. Tight fitting clothing is going to be faster than loose fitting clothing. Smaller frontal area or a more aggressive position is going to help. And whether it's Aero arms at 90 degrees on the hoods or puppy paws position, which is admittedly more dangerous, the difference between those is very, very small, but the difference between the arms and the hoods at 90 degrees and being upright is very, very big. And so again, overcomplicating it, just getting the basics right is where the biggest gains are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can often, when we're trying to give people recommendations on their setup, it's a case of, very rarely do we see someone doing everything absolutely perfectly. There's often like a little couple of things there, and they're like, I hadn't thought of that. And then suddenly you make a small tweak and they go a lot faster. Your measured CDA goes down. So yeah, just, and you don't have to be, an aerodynamicist to know all of this stuff. It's just trying to pick up the little bits where you can. And then as you apply these things incrementally, then your speeds will go up.
The other, if we're talking about frontal area and those positions, the other big element that will be in the wind or out of the wind or whatever way you want to put it is going to be our helmets. So often we hear about time trial helmets, what's faster, what's slower. That is very individually dependent on each rider. Is it the same with Aero road helmets, or is it a pretty safe bet? Do you put on an Aero helmet versus a vented helmet, you're going to see some significant gains?
So the interesting thing about road helmets is that because the head of the rider is often above their back, you're effectively treating a very similar shape, a human head, with a helmet on it in effectively free airflow. So the better road helmets tend to be kind of largely speaking better on most people. So if you tested a helmet on someone and they have their head stuck straight up in the air, and you test the helmet on them, and then you have someone else with a sort of similar head stuck up in the air position, then you'll probably find a similar result. The reason why aero helmets are so different is because the rider's head is much closer to their body, and there's a lot more interaction between things like their shoulder width, where their hands are, the angle of their back, all that kind of thing. So the more aggressive your position is with a road helmet, the more it'll interact with your body and things. But you have to really be pushing it. Okay. So actually, yeah. Conversely, compared with aero helmets, where it's exactly as you say, it's very individual, and you can't just give a one size fits all. You know, you could give someone 5 very popular fast helmets that work on lots of people, and they could all be terrible. With an aero road helmet, the better ones tend to be pretty good on most people. At least that's what we found. And these days the companies are doing pretty good testing. So if someone's done some testing and they've got some data on an aero road helmet, it'll be better than the other helmet that they make that's not aero. Let's put it that way. So,
I mean, if anybody is doubting your expertise in terms of aero helmets, I'll direct them towards a Google search for Xavier Disley, I think 2009 time trial helmet, which should pop up an image from the time trialing forum, where you'd effectively fashioned, let's say, a modern time trial helmet way back 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was National 10 in might have been 2008. Yeah, so the idea was, I mean, it looks horrendous. I mean, I just made out of polystyrene and duct tape.
You'd taken, obviously this is a podcast and people can't see what we're talking about, so you'd taken a time trial helmet from that era, and you had, I mean, it looks like you got paper mache or something and stuck it on the sides.
Yeah, it looks awful. I mean, I haven't got the greatest expression on my face as well, but the idea was to deflect the air around my shoulders. It was like a downhill ski helmet. And then, lo and behold, suddenly that's what helmets are doing these days. But it looks awful. But I didn't come last, and the idea was there. What was good was that it diverted the attention away from the gigantic leg fairings I had on at the time as well. So that was good.
Yeah. I guess you probably don't have A/B testing of if it was actually faster or not from back then, but I'm wondering, have you done any testing on modern road aero helmets? And if you have if someone came to you for coaching services and they needed to buy an aero helmet, do you have a go-to, or do you have a top 3 that you test on riders and go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got a whole load of them. What we found, the latest Specialized Evade is pretty good. That's been pretty good on basically everyone. And we've got the Bond Ranger Ballista. Looks nice, but it wasn't any quicker on me. It hasn't been any quicker on a couple of other people compared with the Evade. And the differences are quite small. And obviously the speeds that some people are traveling when you're looking to use an aero road helmet, obviously slower than you will be on in a time trial or in a track situation. So other things come into play in that scenario. So comfort, can you put your sunglasses on top of the helmet if you want to, that fits and all that kind of thing. With a time trial helmet, you can kind of get away with, this helmet's not great for comfort, but it's okay because I'm only wearing it for half an hour. Whereas on an aero road helmet, if it's the only one you're going to be wearing for, the foreseeable future, then other considerations might come into it. And if the effective wattage saving is, 1 watt or something at 40 kilometers an hour, which is your target speed, over another helmet that you don't like or doesn't fit you very well, then there are other considerations to come into it. But yeah, as a go-to, I mean, I wear the Specialized Evade, it's quickest on me. So that's a thumbs up from that perspective.
Is there anything listeners need to know in terms of positioning on the head? Could they get a photo of themselves side on and go, well, that helmet's horizontal or it's at a certain angle?
I think that it's because your head moves around so much, it's tricky to prescribe it. In a time trial situation, if you had an aero road helmet and you wanted to go super fast, or like in a breakaway or something, and you're off the front on your own, you would want to have the helmet ever so slightly back on your head, so that when you have your head very, very low and you've got a very horizontal torso, that you're kind of almost filling the gap in between the back of your head, rather than looking straight down and the tail of the helmet, because these road helmets have tails these days. When you're looking straight down, the tail of the helmet's stuck up. That's one scenario where the Monterey Ballista is pretty good, because the back of the helmet curves down quite a bit, and it's got this kind of extra shelf on it. You can see what they're trying to do there.
Like a downwash.
Yeah, exactly. But generally speaking, like, because they're not perfectly tailed helmets, they're not going to work like amazingly like a time trial helmet would do in that scenario, where it kind of completely fills in all the gaps between your head, back of your head, and your torso. But I'd say that the general rule of thumb is to never look straight down if you're trying to get aero. Is to kind of think about looking look forward and down. So kind of you can stick your head down, but then lift your chin up a little bit, and then that brings the back of the helmet more in line with your body. That's quite a good. And that's a good tip for whether you're doing a time trial or whether you're like road racing or something. And you see people, staring at their headset top caps and stuff, and it's just like, it's not really helping. Like, having your head low but chin up is actually quite a good cue to bear in mind.
Yeah, there's one line you mentioned there I'm going to pick out, and that's getting your head in line with your body. And that's, if you can make it one object instead of two separate objects, that's a win, isn't it? Regardless of what helmet you're wearing.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing you've tested a lot at Aerocoach is tyres. I want to delve into tyres. I'm going to come back to position in a second, but I want to delve into tyres because you've tested that a lot. Can you share any findings you have from that, and any advice you have for road riders from there?
Yeah, so obviously tyres improve or reduce your rolling resistance, and that's not an aerodynamics thing. But the reason why we do so much testing is because when we developed our wheels, we wanted to make sure that we were developing a system that was fast. So our first wheels came out years ago, and we did a load of testing to find out what the fastest rolling resistance tyre was, and then we designed our wheels around that tyre. So you end up with a package that's super quick. Because sometimes you get recommendations from manufacturers where, you should use this tyre with our wheel and it'll be great, but it might be great aerodynamically, but it might be terrible from a rolling resistance perspective. So we publish free data on our website, updated as often as we can, with all the tyres that we think are relevant for racing. It's kind of time trial focused, but obviously there are a lot of road racing tyres on there too. And we got this kind of big chart. And really, we started doing it ages ago, and companies have really kind of caught on to the fact that, because it's not just us, there's other places like Bicycle Rolling Resistance do a great job of doing exactly the same thing. And they do like gravel tyres as well. And because the public data is out there, and suddenly a company can't afford to make a terrible tyre anymore, because it's measurable and people will third-party test it. Back in the day, you could make wild claims about aerodynamics, let's say, or you could even try and make wild claims about component weight. But suddenly you'd have places that would, like weight weenies, where people would say, I've weighed it and this is garbage. Like, it's 10% heavier than they say it is. So companies can then, was then forced to make, better products that were actually the things that they said that they did. And I think tyres are a good example of that. Now that the public data is out there, you have to really kind of, a company has to make a good tyre, because if the rolling resistance is terrible, then it will slow you down no matter how fast you're going. And that really is true. Like, you go very, very slow, and rolling resistance actually becomes more of a proportion of the total resistive forces. So if you're going uphill, for example, rolling resistance, it's interesting. It scales very much like gradient. So if you have a bad tyre, it's kind of like increasing the gradient that you're riding up in terms of how the physics works. So if people understand that, and they're like, well, I don't want to ride up a 1% gradient all day, then you put on the slightly faster tyre. So tyres make a really big impact. I say really big. I'm over exaggerating here from my perspective, as someone who works in an area where things aren't really that big, but we all think they are. They do make a decent impact to your riding speed, and you can speed yourself up overnight by putting on a nicer set of tires, or let's say you're riding tubes and you put a latex tube in or something like that. It will just add to your speed. There's no question about it. At the very, very top end, you have interactions between the tires rolling resistance and their aerodynamic performance on a wheel, and there's some interesting stuff going on there, depending on what wheels you're using. But But yeah, I mean, and people know that these days, especially with things like tire pressures. Tire pressures have come down loads and loads, and that's to do with improving your rolling resistance in combination with a wider tire, and that improves your comfort. And suddenly, people are riding around on big squidgy tires and still going the same speed, if not faster, and enjoying their ride more. Which is obviously part of the game, is to make sure you're enjoying what you're doing rather than banging down the road on 120 psi, hating life.
Yeah, like there's a reason we call all these things marginal gains. We're not talking turning donkeys into racehorses or anything like that. But I'm curious though, with the testing you do, it's on an outdoor velodrome, if I'm correct, in terms of the tire testing.
No, so we validate the stuff when necessary on the outdoor velodrome.
Okay.
So we do all the tire testing is on rollers.
Okay.
So we do roller testing for CRR, but then as soon as you take it outdoors, you then have to understand what the aerodynamics of the particular tire is. Otherwise, you can't do it properly, if that makes sense. So we do aerodynamic testing of certain tires. So we then understand what the CDA is, and then, if necessary, we take them to the outdoor velodrome, and then we can combine the two to understand that but basically, what we find is that the roller testing tracks with the outdoor testing. Everything scales. So if you have tire A, which is X% better than tire B on rollers, you take it outside, and obviously the CRR, the rolling resistance of everything, goes up because you're on tarmac, but the ranking is the same and the scale is the same. So as tire A will still be X% better than tire B. And I know some people don't like roller testing. Oh, it's not real life, etc. And it's just like, well, no, but it reflects what happens in real life. So that's why we do it.
Yeah, the tire ranking from a roller test should be the same as what I've always understood. When you take it outside, the tires will still rank in the same order. The absolute numbers might be different, but what I'm sort of curious though is, like, it's not a decreased or an increased rolling resistance will affect your speed, but it's the combined rolling resistance and aerodynamics that actually it's a combined force when we're outdoors. You mentioned you some aerodynamic testing with tires. Is that an area you want to delve deeper into, and maybe adding, you've got a massive list of rolling resistance now, combining that with aero testing to figure out what is the fastest tire? Because you hear a lot of talk about what's the most aerodynamic tire and what's the lowest rolling tire, but actually it's the combination of both that really matters, isn't it?
It is, but the issue with that is that you then have to run it on like everyone's wheels.
Okay.
And so we do that with our stuff. So whenever we've got some new wheels or whatever, we understand the impact of any tire pretty much that matters on our wheels. But if we wanted to know how it worked on, I don't know, a specialized Roval or an Envy or something like that, then we'd have to do the full spectrum of testing again on a competitor's wheels. So you'd hope that the manufacturers themselves would give you some indication of what would work and what wouldn't aerodynamically for their stuff. And you can see people will recommend particular tires for their particular wheels. Then what you can do is take that information, have a look and see what the rolling resistance of that recommended tire is. If it's terrible, have another think. If it's half decent, then happy days, you're okay. But yeah, the reason why we can't do that is just because it's too big a job. I mean, we did do it. When we do wind tunnel testing on our products and we compare them to other competitors' products, we will test different tires to ensure that we're putting the competitor product in as a good a light as possible. Mm-hmm. So there's some, there's data on our website on some of our wheels, and we just did different widths and tires and things to make sure that we're not just cherry picking and putting like a 35mm tire on a competitor time trial wheel. Oh, it's terrible, So, but that kind of data is quite limited, and we don't publish all of it because it's just reams and reams of data where the end result is, you just want to know what's the fastest thing. You don't really care about what's fourth or fifth or something like that.
I think it is very valuable that you're doing it with your own wheels, and for customers of Aerocoach who are racing with Aerocoach wheels, that's all they really need. So I'm sure that's massively appreciated. I'm interested, have you tested, you mentioned a few different widths there, have you tested the gain/penalty of various tire widths at the moment? Like if we go back to 2008, 2009, when you're doing that time trial, I don't know, you maybe had 21mm tires or something, and right now I'm riding right on the road on road tires that are 40mm wide, and they feel great, but I'm kind of wondering, like, if 28 is the new normal, have you any sort of indication for both the rolling resistance and the aerodynamic aspect of it? What's the gain or what's the penalty from moving to a 38 and then a 35 and then presumably haven't done up to 40 yet on road tires?
So I think the thing to bear in mind when you look at it as an overview is from our perspective, we're developing wheels and we're beholden to what tyres companies are developing. So we don't currently make tyres, but is everyone going to be riding around in a TT in 10 years time with 50 mil wide tyres? I don't think so, right? So the question is, right, is the answer to that question 48? Is it 46? Is it 44? Where's the tipping point? Is anyone ever going to be doing a TT with a 50 mil wide tyre on it? Are we all going to look like motorbikes? Probably not, I don't think. I think there's going to be a point where the frontal area of a massive tyre is just going to be too much. And so you have to have this kind of like balancing act of where do you develop your product in relation to what you think the market's going to do. And so there is a rolling resistance benefit. And there's some interesting stuff around pressures there as well, because obviously you lower the pressure for a wider tyre and you can ride around a better comfort, and the rolling resistance is either the same or slightly improved. But the rolling resistance of the narrower, in inverted commas, tyres is still pretty good. And on the right surface, you can run a slightly higher pressure and it's still very fast. You know, I mean, we're doing work with wheels at the moment and we're running around 28s for TT, which is obviously, you know, where things are going. We've done work on our current set of wheels, so Zephyr, which is a 78 mil deep wheel, and you can run pretty much up to a 28 on that and it's fine. The wheel's quite wide in relation to how much the tire bulges out, and you can run down to like a 20, 21 or something and it's still okay. So it kind of accommodates quite a few different things, but a more modern wheel doesn't need to accommodate a 21, and once you go to the wide internal rim width, you can't run small tires anyway. You end up being a bit limited, and also no one's making them. The smallest Corsa Pro Speed, which is an excellent tire, is a 24. Conti are 25s now at a minimum. So if you want to make the fastest, and we go back to what we were saying before about when we first developed our wheels, and you were trying to make the fastest system. If you want to try and make the fastest system, it has to be around the tires. And if the tires are a certain width, then you have to design around those. And so, yeah, as I said, you're beholden to the tire manufacturers as to how you do things. But I don't see anyone making a 40 millimeter time trial tire right now, certainly, and not in the immediate future. So therefore, wheel technology needs to focus around the narrowest good rolling resistance tire that you can get, because then you get the best of both worlds. You get the small frontal area. It's not all about frontal area, but you do get the smaller frontal area with the narrower tire. You get good rolling resistance, and then happy days. And I think that right now, somewhere between 26, 28 mil is probably where we're. The 25 mil as well are still really good tires, is where we're looking. And the days of 21 mil tires are gone. I
guess, that we're talking time trial there, and maybe the best way to wrap that up is if you were going to do a road race tomorrow, what is the widest tire you would consider for yourself?
For me, probably about 30. So
okay.
I'd do a road. If I was road racing tomorrow, I've got a set of 28s on my road bike, which is what I've been racing on this year. Depending on the course, I think you could probably get away with 30 as long as you had the right wheel to accommodate it. 32, I think, could just be too much. Like, you can corner nicely on a 30, and you can corner nicely on a 28, depending on what manufacturer it is, because some are narrower than others, and that's something else to bear in mind. But yeah, I say for road racing, 28 to 30 is pretty good as a kind of sweet spot at the moment.
And you did do some gravel. Do you buy into the whole 2.2 mountain bike tire, it might be faster on gravel idea, or do you have a gravel maximum tire width?
TBC. We do want to do a bit more gravelly stuff. So I won't shoot myself in the foot by saying something that.
I mean, it's also so surface dependent. Like, there's that many different types of gravel. Yeah.
It's really difficult. When we've been trying to work out gravel protocols, because we have been thinking about this for a while, and figuring out a test. Because really, with that, like, there's no point doing it on rollers, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think you need to have like a test circuit or a test loop where you have a consistent surface that isn't then going to deteriorate after you do your runs and things. And we've been, as I said, we've been thinking about this for ages, and we haven't quite come up with a protocol we're happy with yet, which is why we haven't done it.
We'll maybe pick this up offline, as they say in the corporate boardrooms, because I have a protocol I've developed that I would be interested in getting your opinion on. I'm sure it'll not be up to whatever you've developed, but I'm working on answering the same question.
Yeah. It's a pertinent question to answer, and I think that anyone who can come up with recommendations and helpful things in that scenario would there are a lot of people that would benefit from that.
Finally, on tyres, rule of 105, is that as you're developing new wheels in 2024, as you're testing new tyres in 2024, heading into 2025, is the rule of 105 something, and for listeners who don't know what that is, it basically states that your rim width should be 105% of your tyre width as measured. Is that still something you adhere to? The reason I'm asking that is because as tyres get wider, there is sort of a maximum width to which rims can be. We see that a lot in gravel. And so it's getting more and more difficult to adhere to 105. And so, yeah, I'm wondering where you sit on that.
Absolute garbage.
Okay.
It's something that it was only relevant for rims that were a shape that we've long gone past. And it frustrates me no end that people talk about the rule of 105 because it isn't a rule. It's not a thing. The best tire width for your wheel is going to depend on the wheel itself and the shape of the rim, and not just how wide is it at the brake track. It's where the maximum point of rim width is, where, you know, that could be 50% down the rim. How deep is the rim itself? How much does the angle, I mean, honestly, the amount of work we've done on this kind of stuff where it's the angle of attack of how much you steepen out that widest rim section from where the brake track is, because it might not be a smooth transition from A to B. What do you do with the trailing edge of the rim shape? You know, do you blunt it? Do you make it more pointy? All this kind of thing. And anytime I see this rule of 105 thing, it makes me sad, because it just isn't relevant. Like, you need to speak to the manufacturer and find out what have they done, how have they developed their wheel. They will have put a tire on their wheel when they made it, right? What tire was that? What width was that? Ask them, and they will know. Because everyone any wheel that, if you're buying a wheel for Aero performance and you care about it, then you should be buying it from a company that's done something to do with Aero and hasn't just made up a rim out of nowhere. Therefore, they will have done some testing and they will have recommendations. And that's my first piece of advice to people is just ask the manufacturer what they did. This rule of 105 thing drives me nuts. Because with modern rim shapes, it's just not relevant. It really isn't. And we see it all the time whenever we're doing testing on our own internal stuff, but also, as I said, when we're comparing manufacturers things, we buy manufacturers' wheels, other manufacturers' wheels all the time for wind tunnel testing to see how they compare and how they perform. And it just doesn't stack up, this 105 thing.
Mm-hmm. I think it was maybe widely adopted because it's an easy answer.
That's a frustrating thing, isn't it? I wish I could then qualify it and say, oh, ignore this 105 thing. Instead, it should be 106 or whatever. But the really frustrating and annoying answer is that, yes, it doesn't apply, but I can't give you an exact,
I think that's good advice you have, though, is like, look to what tire the rim was designed with. I mean, I could sit down and draw you a rim that looks like it might be an Aero rim, but who knows if it would be perform. Well, you might know, but I certainly wouldn't know if it's actually going to be aerodynamic or not. And so speak to the manufacturers and maybe look towards the manufacturers who are providing that sort of data, because if they're providing that, that's an indication that they understand what things are important here.
Exactly. And if you don't have the opportunity to do that and you just have a wheel, maybe someone's giving you a pair of wheels, you bought some off eBay because they fit your budget or something, then just ride a tire width that's obviously compatible with the wheel in terms of internal rim width and all that kind of thing, and just ride your favorite tire. Don't stress too much about this thing like, oh, I can't possibly run a 28 because this wheel for the 105 thing can only take with a 26. It's probably fine. But if you are looking for absolute performance and you get a wheel from a manufacturer where they've done their work, then just ask them, because it's not your job to find these things out. It's the manufacturer's job to give you recommendations on how to make best use of their equipment that they've designed. So put the onus on them to give you the right info. It's not amateur cyclists shouldn't have to be armchair or professional aerodynamicists. It's not your job at all. It's the manufacturers to do that for you.
The one thing I said I wanted to go back to on positions was just it's an Aero component that is maybe not an obviously Aero component, and I've previously discussed it on the podcast with Sync Ergonomics. I've also heard You discussed it previously, and that is your saddle and how that can impact your aero position. Can you tell us what you meant by that when you've discussed that previously?
So your depending on your particular mode of cycling. So by that I mean whether you're doing a road race or a mountain bike race or a time trial or whatever, aerodynamics will make more of an impact the faster you go. So if you're mountain biking, you don't have to worry about torso angle quite so much and getting low on the bike. You can have a saddle which allows you good even pressure across the whole saddle, with a stable base, and that you can transmit power through. If you're needing to rotate your hips, and this is the point, then you need a saddle that will allow you to do so. Now, in a time trial situation, you pretty much always want to have your hips rotated so that you can reduce your torso angle, or at least have your lower torso angle isn't always faster in a TT, but let's just, for the sake of argument,
depends on what your shoulders do and if they pop out wide. Yeah.
Let's just assume that you don't want to be sit bolt upright on a TT bike, right? So you want to rotate your hips ever so slightly, and you want to be in that position for the vast majority of your racing. On a road bike, you want to be able to rotate your hips when you can.
We should say rotate forward.
So if you imagine where a number would be on your back if you were doing a time trial, you want to have that number. You don't want that number to be vertical to the wind. You want to be slightly tilted forward, and that's what rotating your hips means. On a road race, you need to be adaptable. So you need to be able to sit upright on the bike with a strong and stable saddle position and something to be able to transmit force off. But you also need to be able to rotate your hips. So you've got kind of I'll use those three scenarios separately. You've got a mountain bike scenario, you've got a road bike scenario, you've got a time trial scenario. And so from a saddle perspective, in a time trial, you need something that will tip you over. So a shorter saddle, which allows you to come forwards without putting too much pressure on the front of the saddle, but still allows you to push on. On a road bike saddle, you need to have something which gives you the opportunity to sit up on the bike and rotate your hips backwards if necessary, but also come forwards if you are trying to get into a more aggressive position without putting too much pressure in areas you don't want pressure. And then a mountain bike saddle is, again, you need to be able to sort of tip your hips forward. Basically, rotating your hip forward is generally a good thing from an aerodynamic perspective. It can be a little bit unsustainable if you haven't done the extra work around things, and if the saddle doesn't really permit it, and you can end up with pressure in the wrong areas and that kind of thing. So I think that's what you're kind of referring to, is this hip rotation. Which is good, because if you imagine someone sat on a saddle and they're bolt upright, and then you lean for the aero bars and you kind of lean from the top of your back, you kind of bend your torso forwards to get to the handlebars, and you end up in this really hunched position. That's not very strong. It's not great for your core. It's not excellent for power production. And what you really want is for your whole body to be able to come forwards if you're trying to lower your torso angle. It's difficult to explain over a podcast, but it's something that we do when we're doing bike fits in the studio, and you can really show riders the impact of not bending from the middle of your back and keeping your back a bit more of a kind of rigid structure, and then tilting the whole lot forwards. And if you try and do that and you can't do it because the saddle's killing you, time for a new saddle if that's your goal. So yes, everything's connected, isn't it? Because that sort of thing is power production, but also relevant to how low your torso angle might be,
and sustaining it.
Yeah, and sustaining it, and how that might improve your CDA. So, and this is what I really love about cycling, and my academic background is obviously in physiology and kinematics, and understanding the interaction between the rider and how they fit on the bike, because it's a different proposition to try and make a component more aerodynamic as it is to try and make the whole system more aerodynamic when you've got a rider who says, oh no, but I have an injury, or my left leg's a bit longer than the right leg, or I can't reach this, or whatever. And everyone's very different. So understanding that whole package I find absolutely fascinating, and makes it more interesting when you're watching racing as well, because everyone's different. It's not just it's not like remote control cars. Everyone is very individual, and you can definitely see that when you see riders racing.
Yeah, it's optimizing the individual system that's really the key here. You mentioned it's very difficult to explain on a podcast. I actually dedicated an entire podcast to try to delve into saddle angle, and I think we coined it the progressive saddle positions for modern road riding. That was back in, I think it was back in March. It was with Nick from Wove, who had developed it with the Mags saddle, which was all about enabling that forward rotated hip position or pelvis position, and helping a rider sustain a more aero position. So for listeners who haven't heard that one yet, they can go back in the catalogue and tune into that. Nick did a much better job than I did. Yeah, we might wrap up this segment of the conversation, and just I want to know, because a lot of our listeners will, like, a lot of what we've covered today will not be new to them. I'm sure there will be nuggets of information in there, and a lot of them are also sort of highly optimized already. And you know, I know from our Discord channel, some of the talk about skin suits and different equipment, and that our listeners know what they're talking about, and they know how to optimize their systems. I'm curious though, if you've got like obviously you will work with a lot of riders who are highly optimized. Also, you're constantly in the wind tunnel. Is there any sort of hacks you could share for that individual that they might not have yet thought about? And things that I've seen creeping into World Tour cycling are, there seems to be something going on beneath the overshoes for some riders, where they seem to be like smoothing out their shoes. There's other riders who are putting gels on their biceps underneath the skin suit and stuff. Is there any hacks like that you can share for the listener?
I think that it's pushing the brakes really. But yes, obviously, I mean, as you said with the article that you did about Richard Bussell with all the silly aero fairings that we gave him, you can see what we were trying to do.
I didn't say they were silly.
No. I'm saying they're silly, and I was the one that put them on him.
Okay.
Right. The point of that was just to kind of just show what would happen if you didn't regulate things out. So everyone hated it, and now it's been regulated out, which is good. But yeah, sorry. So yeah, putting gels and things. I mean, I wouldn't recommend people do that, because I don't think it's against the spirit of the rules. I don't think it's like part of the rules. I think it is like not allowed, whether someone's noticed it or not. But yeah, I think if you having overshoes in a road race rather than because I think you're still allowed to do that now because it's inclement weather, isn't it? But no one really knows what that means.
Does seem to be an obvious thing that's often overlooked, is overshoes in road races, and aero overshoes we're talking about.
Even just aero shoes in general. I mean, having buckles everywhere is terrible. Having socks that aren't properly aero is terrible. And people just, I feel as though people haven't really figured that one out. Long sleeve jerseys, if you've got hairy arms, cover them up. Aero gloves, like all these kind of things that are, again, like all part of the rider are the important things to get right. Helmets, as you mentioned, that's a big one. It's a really big one, to be honest. And number pinning. If you have the opportunity to do any aero testing and you do road racing, then you need to get the jersey or suit that you're going to be racing in, and you need to test how the numbers perform on that suit in the way that you pin them on, because it's huge. Absolutely huge. Like the airflow in that area, if you can get that right, happy days. If you get it wrong, it's slowing you down loads. So figure that one out. I mean, I've got a track race on. This is Tuesday today. I've got a track race on Saturday, and I'm not sure if we're allowed to use pockets or not. I think we're allowed to because it's domestic. But if you're not allowed to use a number pocket in your race, then you need to understand how the pinned number's gonna work on your.
Is there any do's and don'ts there, or is it highly individual?
Yeah, I think that if you can, wrapping the number around your torso is the thing. And like if you have the number square on, it's quite difficult to wrap around the musculature in that area. Whereas if you put it ever so slightly off center, then you can pull the opposite edges of this. Let's say you've got a square number, you can pull the opposite edges taut and then wrap the other two edges around. I haven't really explained that very well, but a more of a diamond shape than a square shape, if you see what I mean.
You're talking about like track numbers that are higher up the torso rather than
road numbers that are lower
on the pockets. Yeah.
But let's say you are running road numbers that are lower, then make sure that the top edge of the number is as flush as possible. Maybe an extra pin or something in the middle is a good idea, and then the bottom edge, you can get away with that being a little bit flappy, but what you can't have is a number that has any edges that are flapping on it in the top edge or the first thing the wind sees. That's all going to be completely flush. If you can pin from the inside of your suit, then that's cool, and use a ton of pins just to create a line of pins to completely close off that top edge, then that's great. If someone released a skin suit right? And it had two very flappy pockets on the back of it. No one would buy it. Right? but people aren't spending enough time figuring out how to pin their numbers or practicing it before a race, and they just turn up on race day like, oh, I've got to do this again, and I haven't practiced it.
The thing I used to do was, and I think there are adhesive sprays that might be a better option, but I used to use tub tape, which is effectively just double-sided tape, but very strong double-sided tape, strong enough that maybe if you spend a lot of money on your skin suit, you might not want to do this, but it certainly kept the numbers flat.
I have seen people to use adhesive spray before, but it has, I've seen it wreck suits as well. But so I think numbers, helmets, overshoes, forearms and gloves is a good one. And if you can't do overshoes, then aero shoes of some description, or a shoe with a cover of some kind or something is good. And also bottles as well. I would suggest that people tend to, depending on how long your race is and what access you have to water bottles and things, you don't need to drink that much. If you're after like really like high performance stuff, you don't have to have 2 1-litre bottles on your bike at the start of a 2-hour race. Like you just don't. Yeah, you might be a bit thirsty later if you've only got 2 500s on there or something like that, but it's not going to affect your performance as much as it might affect your aero if you're trying to sprint at the end, of that kind of thing.
I've been testing Aero water bottles of late. I'm heading into my 3rd day of testing that. The results have not yet been conclusive. The only conclusive answer I have so far is that Elite's time trial bottles, they like the ones that are not round, they're not like Trek and Cannondale both have these new Aero water bottles that you can fit a round bottle into the same cage, or you can use their Aero shaped bottle. But the Elite time trial specific bottles are, I found, to be significantly faster. Well, I mean, significantly, we're maybe talking 10 seconds over 40k. But it depends on the frame that you have. But what that does tell me is that the savings of the more regular shaped Aero bottles is, if it's 10 seconds over 40k for a proper Aero time trial bottle, it's even less for an Aero shaped round bottle.
Yeah, I mean, 10 seconds might not sound like a lot, but it does add up, and it still has liquid in it, you know?
Yeah.
A little while ago, I did a 6-hour crit, and I did it off 2 Elite Aero bottles, and I think I had 3 gels, and I won it. And, you know, that's not a lot of calories, but I had enough, and maybe more than 3 gels. I think I might have like five or 6 gels, but they were like proper. There was a lot of carbs in there, and it was all beta fuel in the bottles, and it got me through. And I didn't have to stop because people were pit stopping. It was around a motor circuit, and I won the race. Like, you know, there you go. And I was very, very thirsty by the end of the race, but I, you know, that's not the point, is it? It's about how fast can you go?
I was so relieved when I got that result, though, because I have been using those Elite bottles for years in the ultra endurance stuff that I do, and the support crew are always cursing me because they're so much more difficult to refill. And I worked it out, and some of the races I'd done, they could have been like 3 minutes worth of savings, because, you know, you're not doing 40k, you're doing 500k, 600k. So.
But if that's 3 minutes of someone cursing because they can't get water in your bottle,
that's not my problem.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah, that is my problem if they can't get me the water. But anyway. Well, folks, that wraps up part 1 of our conversation with Xavier Disley from Aerocoach. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the fundamentals of aerodynamics to actionable tips for optimizing our bike setups, our position, our gear. But we're not done yet. Part 2 of this 2-part series with Xavier is coming up, and in that we'll be delving deeper into the world of aero testing. We're going to explore the different methods available to us, everything from wind tunnels and CFD right the way down to simple aero tests that we can do at home without any additional expense, and how they can help you make more informed decisions about our setup and optimize our aerodynamics. And so with all that to look forward to, we will leave it there for this episode. All that's left for me to say is that if you've made it this far into this podcast and you're not an Escape Collective member, well, it's not very often that happens, because normally Performance Process is a members only podcast. It's our members subscriptions that make this podcast happen. It simply wouldn't happen without our members. So if you want to continue seeing it happen, if you want to continue to listen to it and continue getting all the tips that we bring you from our expert guests without ads or interruptions, then please do head over to escapecollective.com and sign up there, become a member, and have full access to all of our written and audio content. Thank you.